All right, so we're diving into Leviticus today, this deep dive. I know a lot of you have been asking to cover this book, and I think you guys made a great choice. We're going to be taking a close look at chapters 1 through 27. Turns out there's way more to unpack than meets the eye, right?
Yeah, it's not just a list of rules. There's actually, Leviticus gives us a fascinating window into like the heart of the Israelites' relationship with God. And two key themes really jump out: offerings and holiness.
Yeah, and we're going to see how those two ideas shape their lives and their beliefs in some pretty unexpected ways.
Definitely.
So offerings. Leviticus opens with like a whole bunch of different types of offerings, each with its own specific purpose. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of like each offering, what's the big picture here? Why were offerings so central to their relationship with God?
Well, offerings were more than just gifts. They were a concrete way, to bridge this gap between themselves and a God who they saw as utterly holy. So they used these offerings to express their devotion, acknowledge God's provision, and even seek atonement for, we're all human, we're all going to mess up.
Yeah, so it was about more than just saying sorry. Like, how did these offerings actually help them mend that disconnect they felt with God?
Each offering kind of addressed a different dimension of their relationship with God. So, for example, you have the burnt offering described in Leviticus 1, and this one was all about complete dedication to God. So the whole animal was consumed by fire, symbolizing this like total surrender of the self to the divine.
Oh, wow. So would that be like more about expressing their devotion then?
Yeah. It's a powerful statement of commitment.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with the sin offering in Leviticus 4, which focused more on unintentional sins, right? It highlights that even when you make mistakes, even when you don't mean to mess up, there's still this need for purification, for setting things right.
It's interesting. Like when I was reading this, the thing that really struck me was how the type of animal sacrificed in the sin offering, it actually changed depending on who committed the sin. So like a high priest would offer a bull, but an ordinary person might offer like a goat or even birds. It's like this, sliding scale of responsibility.
Yeah, you've got it. The weight of the offering, it directly reflected their perceived level of responsibility and also their closeness to God. So the high priest, as the mediator between God and the people, he carried this much heavier burden.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the burnt offerings for complete dedication, sin offerings for the unintentional sins.
Yeah.
But what about when someone knowingly breaks the rules?
Well, in those cases, that's where the guilt offering comes in, right?
Yeah.
Described in Leviticus 5 and 7.
Okay.
This isn't about accidents. This is about acknowledging intentional wrongdoing. You messed up on purpose. You have to own up to the harm that you caused, right? And then actively seek forgiveness and restoration. Much more deliberate.
It sounds like a very tangible way to really grapple with your guilt and try to make things right. But, Leviticus isn't all doom and gloom and you messed up.
Yeah.
And all this stuff. Like, there's also joy, right? There's celebration. There's gratitude.
Oh, absolutely. Alongside all these offerings that deal with sin, we find offerings that focus on joy and thankfulness.
Okay.
Take the grain offering in Leviticus 6, for instance.
Okay.
It's this really simple gesture acknowledging God's blessings and provision.
Oh, so like giving thanks for a good harvest. Or like a plentiful meal.
Exactly. It's this humble recognition of God's role in their well-being.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you have the peace offerings, which are laid out in Leviticus 7. And these were all about celebrating and kind of strengthening the connection with God, but also with fellow Israelites. And these offerings involve sharing a meal, which makes them unique. They become this really tangible expression of gratitude, fellowship, peace within the community.
So it's not just an individual thing. It's about strengthening that community bond as well.
Exactly. They highlight this interconnectedness, right relationship with God and maintaining harmonious relationships within the community. Your devotion isn't just personal. It has social implications.
Okay.
But if you want to talk about an intense communal ritual, we got to talk about the Day of Atonement described in Leviticus 16.
Now, this is definitely one that captures the imagination. A day of fasting, introspection, and that striking ceremony with 2 goats. What made this day so significant? Like, walk us through it.
This was like hitting the reset button for the entire community.
Whoa.
Right. Imagine everybody gathered, fasting, reflecting on their actions. It was a very solemn occasion, The high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, which is the most sacred space in the tabernacle, and he'd make atonement for his sins, his household sins, using the blood of a sacrificed bull.
So it's serious, high stakes.
Yeah.
Where did the goats come in?
Okay, so 2 goats.
Okay.
One was designated for the Lord and the other for Azazel. The goat for the Lord was sacrificed as a sin offering, symbolizing the cleansing of the people's sins. But the goat for Azazel, that's where things get really interesting.
This is the one where they symbolically placed all the sins of the Israelites on the goat,
Yeah.
right? And then sent it away. What's the deal with this Azazel character? Kind of mysterious.
Yeah, it's a detail that's puzzled scholars for centuries, right? Because Azazel's only mentioned here in the Bible, and its meaning is very open to interpretation. Some believe it refers to a desolate, inaccessible location. So it's this idea of separation from God, the casting out of sin. Others interpret it as a demonic entity, like a personification of evil.
So either a desolate place or a demonic entity. Either way, it paints a vivid picture of removing that sin from the community, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of underscores that need for this continual purification. But would it be fair to say that this focus on ritual purity is only one side of the holiness coin? Because Leviticus also deals with ethical behavior and social justice as well, right?
Yeah.
You got it. Leviticus isn't just about, rituals and sacrifices. It's a blueprint for holy living, for creating a just and compassionate society that reflects God's character. Mm. And chapters 18 through 20 really dive deep into the ethical and moral dimensions of holiness.
So we're moving beyond the rituals. We're looking at their interactions with others. What really jumps out at you from these chapters? What did holiness look like in their everyday lives?
Well, Leviticus 18, it really emphasizes the sacredness of human relationships, mm-hmm. especially within families. It sets these clear boundaries against sexual immorality. It condemns incest, adultery, bestiality. These laws were designed to protect the integrity of the family unit, which was really the foundation of their society.
So it's about respecting that sanctity of marriage, of family, setting those clear boundaries for those relationships?
Exactly. Recognizing that those relationships are a reflection of God's own design for humanity and they deserve protection. But the idea of holiness goes way beyond just sexual morality. In Leviticus 19, we see a broader spectrum of laws that champion justice, compassion, and respect for all members of the community.
Give us some examples of how those values played out. What specific things were they supposed to do or avoid doing?
Oh, well, for instance, Leviticus 19.19, it strictly prohibits oppressing or robbing your neighbor. It even says you can't withhold a worker's wages overnight.
So fairness in all your interactions, especially when it comes to, those who are vulnerable, those with less power.
Yeah. It's about ensuring that everyone, even the most marginalized, is treated with dignity and respect. Mm-hmm. And, you got to remember, these laws were given to people who had just escaped slavery in Egypt.
Right.
They were building a new society,
right.
One based on justice and righteousness, in stark contrast to the oppressive system that they just left.
It almost sounds very forward-thinking for its time, this social code. And it's interesting how they kind of intertwine ritual purity with ethical behavior. So, for example, in Leviticus 19, respecting your parents is right next to observing the Sabbath. It's they're equally important.
That's a crucial point. Ritual and ethical behavior, they're inseparable. You can't claim to be holy just through your religious practices while disregarding, your responsibilities towards others. It's about living out your faith authentically in every aspect of life.
So it's not just about what you do in the temple, it's about how you actually conduct yourself out in the world.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really intriguing aspect of Leviticus, the laws concerning clean and unclean things. Chapters 11 through 15, they delve into what they could eat, how they handled bodily discharges, these intricacies of maintaining ritual purity.
Now, this is where I think a lot of people get tripped up, right? Especially with the dietary laws. Can seem really arbitrary to modern readers. Why all this fuss over which animals are clean and which ones are unclean?
Yeah, it's easy to kind of dismiss them as, just outdated hygiene practices. But there's a much deeper symbolic layer at play here. Categorizing animals as clean or unclean. It was about visually and symbolically separating the Israelites from other nations, preserving their unique identity as God's chosen people.
So it's less about the actual animals and more about what they represented, this symbolic boundary that set them apart.
Exactly. Outward expression of their covenant with God. A visible reminder of their distinct role.
Okay, so what about all the rules regarding bodily discharges, like menstruation, childbirth, skin diseases, Leviticus 12, 13, and 15? Get into a lot of detail about all that.
Right. So those laws, again, about ritual purity. recognizing the temporary nature of certain states of uncleanliness, not meant to shame or ostracize people, but rather, acknowledge the power of life and death, the inherent cycles of the human body.
So not viewing those things as inherently bad or wrong, but more about recognizing they required a period of separation, of purification before rejoining the community.
That's a good way to put it. And these laws also served a very social function, for example, providing women time for rest and recovery after childbirth. So,
It's interesting to consider these laws from their historical and cultural context instead of just judging them through a modern lens.
Absolutely. We got to remember they were given within a specific cultural and religious context, and they served a purpose in shaping the identity and practices of the Israelite community. But speaking of shaping identity, let's talk about priests.
Okay.
They had this crucial role in maintaining this whole idea of holiness, right?
Yeah. The gatekeepers of holiness, what set them apart? What were some of the things that made them different?
Exactly. The guardians of the sacred, intermediaries between God and the people, and their entire lives were governed by this set of regulations.
So Leviticus 21 and 22 lay out the guidelines for the priests.
Yes. And they were strict. Forbidden from contact with the dead, except for their closest relatives. Physical blemishes were also disqualifying because they were seen as imperfections that could hinder their service.
Wow. Sounds like there was a lot of pressure on them. Every move was under scrutiny.
Absolutely. But those stringent regulations, they elevated the status of the priesthood, highlighted the gravity of their role, underscored the sacredness of the task entrusted to them. Their very lives were meant to be a living example of holiness.
Like living embodiments of holiness, right?
Exactly. Their very presence served as this reminder of God's holiness and the importance of the covenant. We could probably spend a whole other deep dive unpacking the intricacies of the priesthood, but there's another fascinating aspect I think we should touch on, and that's the sabbatical and jubilee years discussed in Leviticus 25. These laws reveal a deep concern for social and economic justice. Pretty remarkable, really.
This is something I've been really curious about. What were these sabbatical and jubilee years all about? What made them so special?
Okay, so every 7th year was a sabbatical year.
Okay, so every 7th year.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Okay, so picture this. Every 7th year, the land was given a complete break. No planting, no harvesting, a full year of rest and rejuvenation.
A forced vacation for the fields.
Oh, exactly. I like that.
It was like a Sabbath for the land itself.
That sounds really nice in theory, but I imagine that would have been a tough sell for people who relied on that land for their livelihood.
Oh, yeah.
What was the purpose behind it?
Well, it served a few important purposes.
Okay.
First, it was a powerful reminder that God was the ultimate owner of the land and that he would provide for their needs even during a year of rest. It was an exercise in trusting his provision.
Okay, so a lesson in faith and reliance on God.
Right.
But there was also a practical side to this, right? I mean, giving the land a break must have had ecological benefits as well. Absolutely. Letting the land lie fallow helped prevent soil depletion, which is surprisingly forward-thinking for that time period. They understood the importance of sustainability and caring for the land even thousands of years ago.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so every 7th year was a sabbatical year for the land.
Yeah.
What about the Jubilee year? You mentioned it happened every 50th year. What made it so unique?
The Jubilee year was even more radical.
Okay.
Imagine this. Every 50th year, all debts were completely forgiven, and any land that had been sold was returned to its original owners.
Whoa, that's like hitting a giant reset button on their entire society.
Yeah.
It must have had a huge impact on their social and economic systems. What was the thinking behind such a drastic measure?
It was a brilliant way to prevent long-term poverty and the accumulation of land in the hands of a few. The Jubilee year ensured that families wouldn't be trapped in perpetual debt or lose their ancestral lands, promoting a more equitable distribution of resources.
It sounds like a built-in mechanism to prevent extreme wealth disparities and ensure everyone had a chance to thrive. It's like they recognize that a healthy community depends on the well-being of all its members, not just a privileged few.
Exactly. The Jubilee year was a powerful expression of God's concern for the poor and marginalized a testament to his desire for a just and equitable society. It's a radical concept, even by today's standards.
I'm really struck by how these ancient laws, particularly those around the sabbatical and Jubilee years, address issues that are still relevant today. Environmental sustainability, economic inequality, and the need for rest and renewal. It makes you wonder what we can learn from them, even in our modern context.
There's a lot we can learn. Leviticus pushes us to think deeply about our relationship with God, with each other, and with the world around us. It reminds us that true holiness encompasses more than just rituals and pronouncements. It's about embodying God's character in every aspect of life, including how we structure our society and care for those in need.
It's fascinating how these laws are intertwined with a deeper message about justice and compassion. It's not just about following the rules, it's about creating a society that reflects those values.
That's a key insight. It's about putting those principles into practice, not just paying lip service to them. And that leads us nicely back to the various offerings we discussed earlier. Though we no longer practice animal sacrifices, those offerings provide a symbolic framework for understanding how we can live out those values in our own lives.
That's a great point. It's like those offerings become metaphors for the sacrifices we make in our own lives, the things we're willing to give up, the ways we choose to serve others, and the commitments we make to align our actions with our beliefs.
Exactly. What are we offering in our daily lives? What are we willing to let go of in order to live more justly and compassionately?
And it's not just about personal sacrifice, right? It's also about advocating for systemic changes, like those embodied in the Jubilee year, that promote justice and equity on a larger scale.
You're absolutely right. Leviticus reminds us that our faith shouldn't just be a private matter. It should have a real impact on how we engage with the world around us, how we fight for the vulnerable, and how we work towards a more just and compassionate society.
Okay, let's circle back to those thou shalt nots for a minute, particularly those laws concerning clean and unclean things. I still find the dietary laws a bit puzzling. What relevance do they hold for us today, if any?
While we may not adhere to those specific dietary restrictions, I think there's a deeper principle we can glean from them. It's about mindfulness, intentionality, and making conscious choices about what we consume both physically and mentally.
So it's not about avoiding certain foods, but rather about paying attention to what we're putting into our bodies and minds. Are those choices nourishing us, leading us towards wholeness and alignment with our values? Or are they hindering us in some way?
Exactly. What are we feeding ourselves, both literally and figuratively? What kind of information are we consuming? What media are we engaging with? These are questions worth reflecting on.
I like that. It's about being more deliberate in all areas of our lives, not just our diets. And this idea of setting boundaries, of creating space for the sacred, that's something we can all benefit from, even if it doesn't involve avoiding pork or shellfish.
I agree. It's about recognizing that some things deserve a different level of reverence and intentionality, whether it's certain foods, certain activities, or even certain relationships. We need to be mindful of how our choices impact our overall well-being and our ability to live a life that reflects our values.
And speaking of setting things apart, let's talk about the priests and those strict regulations that govern their lives. I know we don't have a priesthood in the same way today, but what can we learn from their example?
Though the role of the priests has changed, the principles behind those regulations still resonate. They were set apart, consecrated for a specific purpose, and their lives reflected that calling. It's a powerful metaphor for how we approach our own work, our own areas of service, and our unique contributions to the world.
So it's about recognizing the sacredness of our own callings, whatever they may be. Are we approaching our work with integrity, dedication, and a sense of purpose? Are we striving for excellence, not just for our own gain, but for the betterment of something larger than ourselves?
Precisely. It's about seeing our work, our passions, and our talents as gifts to be used responsibly and for a purpose that transcends our own self-interest. It's about finding that intersection between what we love, what we're good at, and what serves the world in a meaningful way.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Offerings, the Day of Atonement, the intricate relationship between ritual purity and ethical behavior, the roles of priests, and even those fascinating sabbatical and Jubilee years. But Leviticus doesn't stop there. It ends with a powerful message about the consequences of our choices, both individually and collectively.
You're right. Chapter 26 of Leviticus lays out a stark contrast between the blessings that come from obedience to God's commands and the curses that follow disobedience. It's a potent reminder that our actions have consequences, both positive and negative.
It sounds like a divine if-then statement. If you align your life with God's will, then you will experience blessings. But if you choose to disregard those principles and go your own way, then there will be consequences. And those consequences aren't sugar-coated, are they?
No, they're described in pretty vivid detail: hardship, disease, defeat, even exile. It's a sobering message meant to emphasize the importance of choosing wisely and living in accordance with God's design.
It sounds like a warning shot across the bow, a wake-up call to take our choices seriously. But even amidst those warnings, there's a message of hope, right? It's not just about punishment, it's about the possibility of redemption.
You're exactly right. Even when outlining the potential for curses, Leviticus 26 emphasizes God's unwavering love and his desire to restore his people even when they've strayed. It highlights his willingness to forgive and offer a path back to wholeness and blessing.
So no matter how far off course they might have veered, there was always the possibility of turning back, of returning to right relationship with God and experiencing his restoration. It's a powerful reminder that second chances are always possible.
Absolutely. It speaks to the heart of God's character. He is a God of justice, yes, but also a God of boundless mercy and forgiveness. He longs to be in a right relationship with his people, to bless them and to see them thrive.
It's striking how Leviticus seamlessly weaves together these seemingly opposing ideas, holiness and sin judgment and mercy, ritual purity and ethical behavior. It's a complex tapestry that reflects the complexities of human experience and our relationship with the divine.
That's what makes Leviticus so compelling. It's not a simplistic set of rules or a dry theological treatise. It's a profound reflection on what it means to be human, to navigate the challenges of life, to grapple with our shortcomings, and ultimately to seek a path towards wholeness and right relationship with God and each other.
Okay, so we've delved into the depths of Leviticus, exploring the intricate details of the sacrificial system, the powerful symbolism of rituals like the Day of Atonement, the profound connection between ritual purity and ethical conduct, the role of the priests, and even those radical social and economic principles embodied in the sabbatical and Jubilee years.
And through it all, we've seen that Leviticus isn't just an ancient text relegated to a bygone era. It's a book that still speaks to us today, offering timeless wisdom and profound insights into what it means to live a life of meaning and purpose.
It challenges us to go beyond surface-level interpretations and grapple with the deeper questions that have resonated throughout human history. What does it mean to be holy? How do we live in right relationship with God and each other? How can we create a world that reflects justice, compassion, and care for all?
Those are questions worth pondering. And while Leviticus might not provide all the answers, it offers a framework for engaging with those questions in a meaningful and transformative way. It reminds us that the pursuit of holiness is an ongoing journey, a constant striving to align our lives with God's character and will.
So it's not about achieving perfection, but rather about intentionality, about making conscious choices that reflect our values, and about continually seeking to line a way that honors God and benefits those around us.
Exactly. And that journey involves both individual and communal transformation. It's about examining our own hearts and motivations, acknowledging our shortcomings, seeking forgiveness when we fall short, and working to repair any harm we've caused.
And it's also about looking beyond ourselves and advocating for a more just and compassionate world, striving to embody those ethical principles outlined in Leviticus within our own communities.
Absolutely. Leviticus calls us to be agents of healing and reconciliation, to actively work towards a world that reflects God's love and justice. It's about putting our faith into action, not just keeping it confined to religious settings.
It's amazing how a book that's often viewed as dry or irrelevant can be so incredibly thought-provoking and even inspiring.
It is, and I think that's because Leviticus speaks to those deep-seated human longings. We all share the desire for connection, for meaning, for forgiveness, and for a life that truly matters. It offers a roadmap for navigating those desires and living a life of purpose and fulfillment.
Okay, so we've explored the depths of Leviticus, but as always, we want to leave you, our listener, with something to ponder as you go about your week.
What I find particularly intriguing is how these ancient laws, particularly those concerning the sabbatical and Jubilee years, offer a glimpse into a radically different way of structuring society. Imagine a world where every 7th year the land is given a chance to rest and regenerate debts, are periodically forgiven, and land is redistributed to prevent long-term inequality. It's a radical vision of a society built on sustainability, justice, and compassion.
It really makes you question our modern assumptions about ownership success and what truly constitutes a good life, doesn't it? It's like they understood that true prosperity encompasses more than just material wealth. It includes the well-being of the land, the strength of the community, and the flourishing of all its members.
Exactly. It's a holistic view of prosperity that takes into account the interconnectedness of all things, from the environment to social structures to individual well-being.
So what are some concrete ways we can apply these principles in our own lives? I mean, I don't think we're going to see a widespread implementation of Jubilee years anytime soon, but surely there are ways to embody the spirit of these laws in a practical way.
I think it starts with kind of a shift in perspective. Instead of viewing ourselves as, the sole owners of everything we possess.
Right.
What if we saw ourselves more as stewards?
Okay.
entrusted with managing resources for the greater good.
So recognizing that we're part of a larger ecosystem.
Yes.
Both environmentally and socially.
Yeah.
And our actions, have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
Exactly. It challenges us to consider the long-term impact of our choices, not just the immediate gratification or profit.
So what would it look like to incorporate these principles into our modern lives? Even in small ways.
Well, it might mean rethinking our relationship with work and consumption.
Okay.
Could we embrace more intentional periods of rest and renewal? Like a mini sabbatical.
I like that.
For recharge and reconnect with what truly matters.
Yeah, maybe it's about setting aside time each week to unplug, to volunteer, or engage in activities that nourish our souls and connect us with our communities.
Absolutely. It could also involve examining our spending habits. Are we prioritizing experiences over material possessions? Are we supporting businesses that align with our values of sustainability and social responsibility?
And what about that debt forgiveness aspect of the Jubilee year?
Right.
Obviously, we can't just wipe out all debts.
Yeah.
But there might be creative ways to apply that principle in a modern context.
Definitely. Maybe it's about being more forgiving of personal debts owed to us.
Okay.
Or it could mean advocating for policies that alleviate the burden of student loan debt or medical debt, which can trap people in a cycle of poverty.
Yeah, those are great examples. It's about recognizing that sometimes a fresh start is needed, and that extending grace and compassion can have a transformative impact on individuals and communities.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the environmental aspect of the sabbatical year. We're facing unprecedented ecological challenges, and Leviticus reminds us of the importance of caring for the land and allowing it time to heal.
So maybe it's about reducing our consumption, supporting sustainable practices, or advocating for policies that protect our natural resources.
Yeah.
Even small actions multiplied across a community can have a significant impact.
And remember that simple suggestion from earlier, leaving a corner of your garden unharvested.
Oh, yeah.
That's a beautiful symbolic act of acknowledging that we don't need to control and exploit every inch of land for our own benefit.
That's a powerful reminder that abundance isn't just about how much we can accumulate, but about how much we can share and give back.
I think that's a perfect way to encapsulate the spirit of Leviticus. It's a call to live generously, compassionately, and justly, recognizing our interconnectedness with God, each other, and the natural world.
So as you go about your week, dear listener, we encourage you to ponder these ideas. How can you embody the spirit of the sabbatical and Jubilee years in your own life? What small steps can you take to cultivate a life that reflects the values of sustainability, justice, and compassion?
Leviticus may be an ancient text, but its message resonates deeply with the challenges we face in our modern world. It offers a timeless wisdom that can guide us towards a more fulfilling and meaningful way of life.
Remember, even small acts of kindness, generosity, and mindful living can ripple outward, creating a positive impact on those around us and contributing to a more just and flourishing world.
We'd love to hear your reflections on this deep dive. What insights resonated with you? What challenges are you pondering? How do you plan to integrate these principles into your own life?
Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the wisdom that transcends time and speaks to the very core of what it means to be human. Thanks for joining us.